So, was that Tim that said hello before? Or did I?
Yep.
Yeah. Hey, how you doing?
Hi.
Oh, yeah, sorry, I got the day wrong, so that's what...
It's all good.
Yeah, and then I wasn't joking about if my laptop could boot up in time. It took its sweet time.
Yeah, I was like, is he still coming? Or is this another guy? Yeah, maybe he's been distracted, but that's cool. So we got here in Mumble. I think Bean just left, but Sylaris is still here. Dishara is here. There's a few names that might be familiar from the scoreboards.
I'd be DF on the scoreboards.
Oh, you are? Yeah, that's right. You changed your name on Steam. I forgot about that.
To what?
Just DS.
Yes.
Used to be Dishara.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it was a while ago.
No, I've never seen that name. I just never put two and two together.
So I played Boss Rush for the first time since release just earlier, and I didn't know that Venom and Medulla had been popped in, so that was pretty cool.
We'd hoped they'd get in for the release.
Yeah, it's really awesome to see him in there.
Yeah, they were. The only thing I wasn't sure on was if they ever made it into Infinity Drive. I think the only person who would know that would be Transparent Blue, since he's the only one who's finished it. I've only been up to about 37, so...
Yeah, it was early on. I knew I was going to leave out Venom and Medulla because they're both they're not entities really. They're stages.
Yeah, because I know Mishra had said that I guess some of the problems with that was that they had to switch the entire stage, and it was kind of more problems than just the other bosses where they could just drop in.
Yeah, like Venom relies on a empty edge, which is pretty cool. But and like technically, I guess you could imagine the Infinity Drive stage, like the edges drop away, and Venom could show up. But yeah, it's a little bit more complicated than the other three bosses.
And I mean,
Was that why Dark Embryo came around initially?
Dark. Yeah, what was the original? There's a few ideas connected to that. One was just part of it was just the fact that like obviously all the enemies are tunable. They're very adjustable. So the idea of just taking a existing boss and tuning it more difficult was very efficient. And something interesting to do. And it was kind of on this idea of doing a super hard campaign where everything was just going to be like cranked up.
Yeah, there are definitely some things like that I would still like to see. But I mean, yeah, you guys still have your hands full with the console releases, and then depending on how it goes and everything.
Yeah, it's unfortunately we're not at a point where we can really just splurge on additional features and stuff for everyone as much as it would be nice to do.
Sadly. Yeah, that's always the problem. It's such a great game, but then, yeah, there's always like, if it had these features and stuff. But,
yeah.
it's always a lot of work to add stuff like that into, so.
Like I was saying before, I feel like, even regardless, like the game itself is quite solid, and that, I don't feel like it needs anything more to be to be Cactus.
No, it's definitely good. Like I said around the forums and stuff too. It's it's quickly become one of my favorite shooters. So I've played quite a number of them. All kinds of the Waves and Geometry Wars ones, and all kinds of smaller ones that people probably never heard of and stuff on consoles and things like that. It's definitely got a lot of nice features in it.
Yeah, I feel very happy about where it's come. Like the fact that even though it's been a bit of a shoestring budget and a very stressful development, been able to kind of hit everything that was on the list, and get what I feel like is a complete game in. Like it's not missing anything that holds it back. It's just there's some things that you could naturally extend, but yeah.
Even then, it still feels like a very complete game without that. Like I was saying earlier, that'd be great for things like this to be able to have a seeded mode, but like that, it's fluff, it's extraneous stuff.
Yeah, yeah, and like the daily drive, like that was a opportunistic thing that came about mid development. It wasn't part of the original design doc. So I feel really happy that it's one of the few games I've ever worked on where we haven't cut large parts of it to make it fit. Like in that sense, I think it was very well scoped.
Yeah, yeah. And it's nice to kind of, I guess, I mean, I'm going to assume for the other projects that you didn't have the same level of creative control, maybe? Or the same amount of agility that you've had by having the team of people that you've got?
Well, this has been my totally I'll make my own game studio of blackjack and hookers moment, right? Where it's like up until now I've worked in big and small teams. In fact, the best team I ever worked on was we made a game called what was it? Drift Street International, which was a DSi game that nobody played. That was published by Tantalus. Or we were Tantalus at the time. We were the Brisbane arm of Tantalus, which most people don't know existed because it didn't exist for that long. And there were 6 of us in a room, and we came off the back of working on the handheld ports of, or technically the DS port of Cars Race-O-Rama, which was the Pixar Cars tie-in. It was the 3rd game based on the first movie.
Yeah, right.
And we basically took our tech and decided we were going to make... we had no projects lined up. Tantalus was drowning at the time. The what do you call it? The global financial crisis was causing every big American company just to retract into its self.
Yeah.
So we were starved of projects. We had no external kind of things going on. So we basically told Tantalus, look, with our team, we'll work lean. We'll do whatever we need to. Give us... I can't remember how... I think it was something like 3 months or something like that. We'll take all the tech and the knowledge that we got working on this Cars license game, and we're going to make our own game. Give us this time. And they agreed to it. And so we made, in this crazy small amount of time, this... it was kind of like a drift... Yeah, like a... performance cars, drifting. It was set in New York, Tokyo, and London kind of thing. It had, the 3 locations. And it was just this crazy little DSi racing game about drifting, drift racing. And it was really, really good. Like, we nailed everything about it. The whole team was, like, really passionate about it. It was one of those, like, little kind of, small team success stories where we all pulled together. I was modeling cars for some reason. I don't know about cars, but I was modeling them, and it played really, really well. It played way better than the Cars game because we built it around this really fun feeling drifting mechanic and stuff like that. And we finished this game, and just as we were finishing it, they closed the studio down. Most of the team worked out their redundancy on the project, and it got published, and it got relatively okay reviews, and it vanished because nobody ever saw it.
Well, it's a shame. But it's like, that sort of thing happens. People don't really get the opportunity to hear about that. I guess it's not that uncommon.
Yeah, I was just reading something about that from the devs who are doing Space Pirates and Zombies, because it's just 2 people doing that, and part of, I forget who it is now, one of the larger kind of publishers out in BC, and they were talking about how they had spent 11 years making these 2 major projects, and then there was some kind of consulting work and stuff done on like projections for sales and stuff, and I guess the company didn't like the projections, and so they scrapped the entire projects, and had like 60 some people laid off and things, and they were like, you know what, after seeing 11 years of stuff you worked on just get scrapped because of projections not looking like they thought they would. They figured, it was time to go off and do their own thing too.
Yeah, I know that feeling. I shipped a game in, I think, 2003, and then had, like, how many cancelled projects? I think it was, like, 1, 2... there was LA Noire, which I left 4 years before it shipped, so it felt like a cancelled project. Batman... Another one... Yeah, I think there was, like, about 5 in a row. Which was most of my development years. Like I shipped this first project when I joined a games company, and then I got better and better, and I hit my prime, and I really felt like I was doing really good work with animation, and none of it's in a game you can play.
Yeah.
And it's like, it was fine. Obviously, it's not like I personally lost out. I was an employee, so I was working. But as creatively, it was devastating.
Yeah, I think that's what they were kind of getting at, the people from Spaz too. You know, I mean, yeah, you're still at a job and you're getting paid and they're doing the work and everything. But yeah, from the creative side, yeah, they're working on all the stuff that they had been kind of happy about anyway, and then they just got scrapped because of market projections and and some of them too, like. Yeah, some of the stuff would have actually been, good games, but just, the large companies are all about the numbers and everything, right? So it doesn't really matter about the artistic value and, whether or not it would have been enjoyable or not. It's all about the sales figures, so. But that's kind of a problem with the major companies in general these days.
Yeah. One of the interesting things I found, though, was that at Sega, which was where, obviously, me and Nat and Jeff met, what got me was not so much that, like, obviously we were at the mercy of publishers and that kind of stuff a little bit as well, but just the team itself was actually horrifically inefficient. Like, the wastage was just off the charts, and I've seen that, like, I don't know. I'm not sure if it's an Australian games development problem, or I imagine it's a worldwide problem, because I can't imagine these are Australian exclusive problems. But it was kind of devastating to see the amount of money and the amount of effort and the amount of skill that were poured into projects that would ultimately not be that great.
Yeah, they really follow a kind of movie pattern that way. Sometimes with like the stars and everything. So yeah, you can have all kinds of big name people and stuff, and sometimes
the frustrating thing actually was the project immediately before, or the project I resigned on, which was Castle of Illusion Mickey Mouse, the remake. That was actually my attempt to do what I was trying to do with Cactus in a studio environment. I literally wrote I literally built a prototype for that game in my own time and pitched it to the company, and it got greenlit, and it became the company's project and all this kind of stuff. And even with that, even showing them to their face, like, look, we can build a game smart, we can build a game lean, we can get an excellent result with a small amount of people, and then any extra effort we put into it is just like cherry on the top, right? This is. We can ship a competent game, but if we put the whole team behind it, we can ship like this 90, 95 Metacritic, we can do something amazing with this. And instead it just turned into political infighting and a chance for people to try to stake a claim and things, and just the whole thing fell apart, and it was
That's really sad.
Yeah, emotionally devastating.
yeah, there seems to be a lot of that where the larger company focus just on the numbers. They kind of lose a lot of what I guess some of the people kind of originally got into the business for and stuff like that. Kind of disconnect from customers and things, but the entertainment side of it. And
Well, when you've got top level decision makers who aren't invested, like personally invested in the stuff that's going on, it kind of ends up breeding a culture where that sort of thing just kind of has to happen, I guess, like it feels inevitable.
yeah, that too. Who was it? I was just saying something about that, about how they were saying something about Steam's. Oh, you were talking about that last night too, weren't you? About how the Steam doesn't kind of produce an environment that's kind of set up for sort of the artistic side of things with games and everything like that.
Yeah.
It's all about the the sales numbers and everything. And there's been some other articles I've seen about that, like the people who did Axiom Verge. They had a really good article about the pricing system on their game, because people were saying it was, you know, way too much, because they could pick up, you know, some of the old Metroid games and stuff for like $5, and they were like, well, that doesn't mean we should, you know, sell our game at $5, right? And then that was like a really excellent game, but they were saying, you know, some of the problems they were bringing up was that, yeah, Steam was just, you know, kind of tailored people to wait for the sales, and you know, only pick up things like that. And, you know, if you know, if they even if they really like a game, they can still go out and pick up either, like, you know, slightly older AAA titles for, you know, like $5 or stuff when they're kind of off their, you know, off their prime, and so it kind of skews the market a fair bit. But they were trying to make the argument that kind of the games industry as a whole, especially for indie people, needs to kind of find another sort of marketing system where they can kind of leverage the fact that, you know, you'll have people that will really like the game and, you know, will be willing to pay more for it, and work out some kind of system, maybe a payment off of enjoyment or something.
Like after it's been released and played and experienced?
Yeah, so that, you know, you could experience it and find out how much you really enjoyed it, and then, you know, if it turned out to be a game that you would only want to play for, like, you know, an hour or two, that, you know, you were only paying, like, say maybe $5-10 or something for it. But if, you know, you get the people who you know, really enjoyed it and played it for like hundreds of hours, that there might be like extra, like not necessarily DLC, but that kind of thing where there was extra ways to extend the gameplay, and, you know, through other things like that, where it would kind of make paying for a higher price worth it for them too.
It feels like we don't have any storefronts or platforms that are geared towards allowing people to retroactively place a value on something. The closest thing I can think of is like Humble Bundle, when you can up your contribution after you've played the games if you want, but it's only with the bundles and it's only for a limited time.
Yeah, well, that is part of the whole thing. Well, like with the forums there, we were talking about the whole demos and things like that. That's another reason why I think demos are a really good idea, because you know, the fact that you can only really know how much you'll enjoy the game until you've played it, you know. So without a demo, you kind of look at some of the stuff and go, yeah, it looks like it might be a game I might like to play, but you don't really experience it. So I've definitely had some games where I've bought on sale, and then, you know, you start playing and it's like, oh, I actually really enjoy this, and, you know, I'm kind of sad I just bought it at a discount now, because it was actually kind of worth the full price.
Yeah, it's almost like kind of, you want a tip jar kind of thing, where you can kind of make the whole thing really easy and fluid to go, oh yeah, that game, that was great, and it kind of tells you how much you've paid for it, and you can up it if you feel like that was too low, almost.
Yeah. It's just, you know, most of the larger platforms though don't support anything like that, unfortunately.
Yeah. Because I mean, the obvious one that people go for is DLC, but I have a lot of issues game design and structurally with DLC for that purpose, I think.
Well, it's like, if you want to reward someone for the game that you've just enjoyed, a different game, you know, which DLC kind of makes, doesn't really satisfy that directly.
Yeah, there's that. There's the fact that, like, it also, I don't like locking content behind things when it doesn't feel right. Like, obviously, a game is effectively locking content. I'm saying you can't play most of Cactus unless you give us some money, please. But to say, oh, if you really like the game, you could buy extra characters. Either those characters would be essential to the game, in which case they should be in the game, or they're not essential to the game, in which case I'm kind of not sure what I'm selling you. It's kind of, it puts me in this weird bind where I'm not comfortable with either direction.
Yeah, that's something I would have liked. The free-to-play games, for the most part, do it wrong, but I always wish they would have sort of figured that out, because then the free-to-play games could be the kind of way to go with that, where, you know, you just release the game and have some things that could be added where it's pay for, and you know, the people who really do enjoy their time in it can buy those at reasonable prices, and you know, that would kind of work for that model. But I mean, so far most of the free-to-play games just turn into kind of like a micro-purchase system where, you know, it ends up where anybody who enjoys the game, who actually wants to spend time, ends up paying like thousands of dollars just to play the game.
Yeah, I worked at Kixeye for 6 months before jumping onto Cactus, which was enough free to play for me. It's got a very ugly side to it, I think. But as a designer, I struggle with that mentality because the idea of saying, here's a game, now you can buy the bits you want. It would take a very, very, very good designer to build a game that actually functions well that way. It's very difficult to build a game that can function without part of its parts. Like, it either reinforces it or it doesn't. It's like the whole design rule of you should cut away at things until you're left with basically the minimal that you need to do the thing. Any less and it wouldn't work, any more and it's indulgent. That's almost an optimal design. Like, obviously there's different types of games that like a little bit of indulgence, but in general you don't want to have unnecessary parts to your game. It's inelegant. And DLC is, not even DLC, I guess free-to-play where you add in components is almost the definition of that, which troubles me as a designer, I think.
Yeah. Unfortunately, most of them do have that problem. There's some genres, though, that really do work well with it, especially some of the things like, some RPGs or stuff like that where they can do cosmetic things, and they have really no effect on the game, but, you could still offer them for the people who are, enjoying their time and willing to spend something on the game. But something like Cactus, definitely trying to add like a character or something would kind of be hard to do with the whole balance of it.
Yeah, it's kind of tricky, and you can kind of almost think. I see it a lot in Kickstarters actually. There's the difference between offering a token, which is supposed to be some sort of thing to say thanks. This is a small gift that tells us that we care about you. And there's also basically selling stuff. So like some Kickstarters are all about, you can get this merch, you can get these items, you can get this thing. And others are like, we'll give you a thanks in the credit and a poster or something. And it's interesting to see how people react to those two approaches as well.
I feel like crowdfunding is at its best when it's about providing somebody with the opportunity to try to do something that they couldn't do otherwise. It seems weird to me when people use it as some kind of weird pre-ordering system or weird merchandising platform.
I find even cosmetic in-game stuff is weird for Kickstarters. I mean, you're supposed to be making a game happen, then why wouldn't you want everyone to have those items?
Yeah, digital stuff is great.
Yeah.
I guiltily, I don't take the physical rewards in Kickstarters. I go like, just look, send me a PDF art book or whatever, just that's right. Fine. I don't, don't waste the postage on me. I'm trying to fund this.
I do like the physical stuff, but
yeah, I gotta say, I'm in it for. I do enjoy having boxed copies of stuff, and that's something I normally aim for with Kickstarter pledges. But I often pledge above whatever tier it is that I am supporting at, because usually I care about the project enough to want to support it.
Yeah, I do something similar, but it's interesting because you think about like what are you backing this project for? I've seen some like users talking about they're saying like they're comparing the Kickstarter rewards from one project to another, and it always makes my skin crawl a little bit, and I kind of just want to shrink away from the whole thing because it's like you're not supposed to be working out who's got the better value T-shirt. This is about the project, right? Hopefully.
Yeah. It's like if you're not interested in helping the concept exist, then should you really be there? It's weird. And then at the same time, if you say if you exclude those people, you cut down the critical mass that you've got access to.
Really, really tricky. I was thinking about how obviously one great thing about Steam, having recently launched Cactus, was that the build that went up and was the live build literally went up the day before, and it was a pretty minor. We were just changing some last things and stuff like that. It was pretty stable. Everything, we were happy with it. But obviously, in traditional development, you go gold a long time before the game is released. And there's so much flexibility in that. We could literally change the whole game. We could have put a completely different game up minutes before we set the game live.
Well, I was saying earlier that I really admired the amount of like extra texture work and polish and stuff that you guys were able to like push in at the 11th hour when in a lot of other contexts that wouldn't be possible?
See, I feel guilty because there was some stuff I wanted to clean up, but I didn't. But yeah, there were a lot of little housekeeping tasks, like a lot of little menu transitions and things that were bugging me got fixed up, which is good. I just kind of powered through as many little tasks as I could. Just we knew the game was functional. I didn't have anything that was like breaking horribly. But yeah, the flexibility of being able to put a game up live like that, and it goes out to everyone. And we didn't have to have any idea of how many it would sell. In a normal game development, like in a traditional box game development pipeline, you have to be pitching it to the resellers. So first of all, you have to sell it to EB and all the other companies that are going to sell the game, and they buy a certain amount of copies. And if they buy high, then they're going to do massive returns and be angry with you. And if they buy low, then they're going to sell out, and you don't get to sell as much product as you want. So you have to pick this number. You have to know how many people would buy the game, approximately. And if you get it wrong, there's consequences. And the nice thing about that is with Cactus and with digital games is that I had no idea if the launch was going to be huge, a complete failure, or anywhere in between. And there's no material cost to that. At least we're not left like holding the bill when they say, well, you thought the game was going to sell this much, but now I've got a warehouse full of stock.
Yeah. There you go. It's not going to become landfill. Like
yeah,
did.
But that's kind of huge. Yeah. Yeah, but the idea that it both it allows you to have breakaway hits where you go, well, I don't know if anyone's going to like this game, and it just sells massively because, Steam doesn't run out of copies. And it also allows you to consolidate if your game falls short. At least you're not hit with the cost of production and, all the other things.
Yeah, ultimately I think the way Steam is kind of running the whole industry is kind of not good for the long term, but there's definitely some benefits to, well, I guess it was before Steam anyway. There was something else I was reading too about that, about how about basically the same thing you were talking about there with the, like EV games and, some of the more major ones and stuff like that, being able to, basically dictate what kind of content gets added to the games and stuff like that, because they've just got so much purchasing power and things, and then that was kind of the start of the whole sort of pre-order bonuses where there was things exclusive to EV games if you bought it from them, and then you get things like
I'd never seen that before Portal 2.
Weapons or it happened quite a bit, but there was actually Total Biscuit did some really good. Actually, he's got a few really good kind of commentaries on sort of that sort of stuff with the games industry. But he made some really good videos about that kind of stuff too. And how you couldn't get like the whole game at that point because there was always some kind of content locked behind one of the publisher places that was exclusive to them.
Yeah, I didn't know that until I started working at a games company, because I guess in Australia we didn't have as much of the same kind of American style things. But until I started working as at a games company, I didn't know that Walmart would routinely have their own version of each game.
Yeah, it's kind of sad how that went. But yeah, I guess Steam's kind of doing the same sort of thing with some of that stuff, like the way they're kind of manipulating the market for them, where it's mostly, it's just the sales numbers for them that they care about. But yeah, definitely.
Yeah, Steam are kind of interesting. Like on one hand, they're very open and they're very supportive of everything.
Sort of.
But they're very financially driven. Like to the point that like they don't have any sort of hold up about, like, they think that releasing your game on as many different platforms, including competing platforms, helps them because ultimately it helps the ecosystem of gaming, and ultimately that helps them. So they've got this kind of nice, inclusive, everyone's included attitude. But it's everyone's included to make money attitude, which is... it's got this interesting sting in the tail to it, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, that's where their wholesale thing and the mentality they're kind of cultivating with the consumers in there is not so good, but I mean, I guess for them it works out fine for them because they're never going to have the problem. But for the studios and everything, it's interesting.
Well, it was new,
Steam's,
you know.
Steam's
like,
basically the casino.
They pushed new ground and they opened up digital distribution in ways that it hadn't been open before. I mean, I might not agree with the paths that they've taken, but it must have been so hard to know what the implications of anything would be because everything was new ground. And yeah, it used to be that Steam's user base was your market, and people bought everything that was on Steam because there were only hundreds of games as opposed to thousands of games. But now they've got over 100 million active accounts now, I think they were saying, and it's like that's not your market anymore. Your market is some subset of that.
Yeah, they've changed a fair bit that way too. I mean, they're doing a lot of things, still really well, and you'll get a lot of good ideas and stuff. But I find, the original reason, like the whole Ruby soft and like the Origins thing and all their versions kind of failed was because they came out with like kind of a, substandard product to Steam when Steam was already so large, and then they also didn't listen to their, kind of customer base. And,
well, Steam's also like a social networking platform as well. Which a lot of people don't really think about, and I think that plays a big role in the level of influence that it has with regards to, or the ability that other platforms have to compete with it.
Yeah, it definitely helps them, but I find they're kind of not as quick to innovate anymore compared to what they used to. When that was one of the things that helped them so much.
Yeah, I'd go with that.
Yeah, I think that's just inevitable. That you get to a size. It's so much more difficult to make decisions and change paths when you have a bajillion games on you and you're the livelihood of a bunch of companies now. You just become bigger and harder to steer, I think.
Yeah, that's true. Actually, yeah, I was seeing something about that, about how people were trying to say that Steam was supposed to be regulating the games market. And it's like, no, that's not a good idea.
Yeah, well, that comes back to what I was saying yesterday about discoverability platforms and distribution platforms, and if you have those combined, then it does end up being that kind of thing where if you've got a big dominant platform like Steam, it does end up having so much influence on the way that the industry works, and the way that stuff is done.
Yeah, and you can look at other platforms to see how this stuff works as well. Like, obviously Apple has a weird ecosystem where they have so much crap on their store, so instead it all comes down to what Apple selects. Their curation is through their discoverability. So mobile developers will talk about if they can get an Apple feature, then they can guarantee blah blah blah, this much visibility, this much sales or downloads or whatever they want. And it's this big deal. So they're not playing the game of can we make a game and ship it, they're playing the game of can we get Apple to feature us. And so they're sneezing up to their Apple success. Yeah, can we get something that gets selected for the Apple Store? Because if they don't, for the editor pick or whatever, because otherwise they're dead. They're dead in the water because the Apple Store is so huge that you can't get visibility otherwise. And that's a really odd ecosystem as well.
Yeah, it's a bizarre thought, especially like to me. Games are unequivocally art, and they're they should be creative works, and like to have creative works shaped in that way, it seems very wrong.
Yeah, that's the thing with some of the people on the forums too, and they're the guy who just recently had that post up about how the devs for Assault Android Cactus had never caved to put the no battery kind of EX option in.
Oh, that it was galling. I was like, wow, what the hell?
Yeah. That guy.
I think that might be a Linux user, and that makes me sad.
It's really funny. Actually, I sometimes I go to the Brisbane Gallery of Modern Art. and I've done it a few times now in the middle of development, and it's been this really, I kind of almost force myself to go, because I'm like, oh, okay, here we go. And then each time it's been an experience bordering on kind of spiritual, where I kind of feel like a tension I didn't even realize I was carrying unwinds, and it's frightening, because I didn't realize I'd been that highly strung until a little bit of it got released. And it's kind of interesting to surround myself with what's much more pure art than the stuff that I'm working in, because I'm the most artistically minded. It's interesting. Like I'm constantly worried about the artistic tree of Cactus and where it's going is at, and I'm concerned about the technical and practical aspects of it as well. But I'm thinking about it really as this experience and what it's for users and how it's going to be perceived and all this other stuff. And to see and to go into a gallery and actually just like be hit full force with contemporary like art is really really powerful, actually, just because it's such a different world from games, which even at their artistic angle are very commercially focused, I think.
Yeah, it does feel like there's not a lot of, and like I don't know whether that's necessarily like, I don't think that's the medium. Like I think that's just the culture surrounding it. And so it's more like I feel like there aren't enough people
definitely.
who kind of appreciate that it's okay for a game to not be a commercial success, that it still can be good, like and that it's possible to appreciate things as an art, or like at the moment it feels like the closest that we come, like as far as the dominant cultures go, is to appreciate the craft, or like the technical prowess behind games. Like even if you don't like the game, you can say, oh well, it runs really well, or it has these features that are quantifiably well made. But we don't seem to have people appreciating the I don't know if soul is the right word, but we don't see people kind of appreciating games on that level as much.
There is that, but there is something else there that I've been struggling to kind of understand, I guess, is that in art, at least, when you're walking around these kind of things, these are commercial artists, like not commercial art. These are successful. Yeah, I mean, they're making a living out of being artists. They're successful in their own right, but they're creating stuff that is so far away from advertising imagery or graphic design or anything that's like commercially focused that you'd put on products and sell them, kind of thing. They're kind of out there. They're on that thing that where people say, "Oh, I don't understand modern art. It's rubbish. They're just making up stuff and pretending it has meaning and stuff like that." And it's like, just dive a little deeper. Like, relax yourself. Imagine that the world is not a con and there's actually like greater meaning there, and just kind of go over it for a bit. And I guess if you look at Steam is basically your where you put all the games that are basically the equivalent of your cool graphic design and your advertising imagery and your cool, technically well-made, well-crafted stuff. The practical art. When you see an awesome picture that someone drew, like at a convention or something, or some comic book artist, they draw this like badass picture of some action hero doing a fly kick or something, and you go, "Wow, I want that poster." That's art, but it's also very commercially minded in that sense. It's designed for widestream consumption. It's very practical, and that's where games almost exclusively occupies. Even a lot of the games that tend to be like, even stuff like Undertale and things like that, which have this kind of alt game bent to it, are still in that space to a degree. And it's kind of interesting when you compare that to like art movements and modern art.
Expand is really on my mind because I finished it yesterday, and felt, I don't know, moved, I guess, I like that something like that can be on Steam. I don't know if it's a success enough to support Chris in the work that they've done, but wow, I'm glad that it exists.
Yeah, I suspect it's going to really struggle, which is a shame because I love that game. It's beautiful. It's interesting as well though because it's also like it's minimalist, but it's very accessible. It's beautifully accessible. It's the kind of game that if everyone played it, most people would get a lot out of it. It's not the kind of bizarre, navel-gazing, introspective, deconstruction kind of art that you can find in pure art environments. It's actually very practically minded and beautiful in that sense, which is a shame because in the Steam environment it appears as kind of like, oh, this must be like art game kind of.
It's pretentious
kind of stuff. Yeah, that's the thing. It's like it's not pretentious at all. That's the interesting thing about it.
Right. I don't think I'm really ready to enunciate what it is that I like about that game or how I feel about it, but just really, really glad to have had the experience of playing it, and that it's short, and so it's like you can't appreciate it without appreciating experience over length, which it seems to be a bit of an issue as well in the industry at the moment.
Yeah. Well, it's funny that Cactus has been getting that as well. I was not expecting that, actually.
No, me neither. I mean, I look at Cactus and I feel like it's longish for an arcade game like this.
Yeah, I thought there was heaps of game there, actually. I kind of thought I'd gone a bit overboard in hindsight.
Well, yeah, that's what I find it too. Like, I know I played the Geometry Wars 3 with friends there, and I haven't bought it yet because I've got all kinds of technical issues that they don't seem to care about fixing. But the whole game, like, I played the story mode, and he'd already beat the game, so I kind of jumped around in the levels a little bit. But like in 3 hours, I had played most of the story mode levels, and a little bit of the bosses, and done some stuff to beat scores and try to challenge scores and things like that. And that was like 3 hours, and didn't take very long to do that at all. And there's like no story or anything. And then people come over to AAC and they're like, it's not so long and it needs all these cutscenes. And it's like it's already got more than like pretty much every other game in this genre.
Yeah, it's odd. And in addition to that, there's so much side content in Cactus. The Infinity Drive and the Boss Rush and the Daily Drive, and then all the EX modes and stuff. Like, beyond the core content, there's all this extra stuff. And that's not even touching on the kind of replayability that the game has. To say that it's short or lacking in content, it's I have no idea how people can arrive at that conclusion.
I think the only way I can see that is that maybe people see Cactus and come into it as just like a top-down shooter kind of game, and they think they're just going to jump in and maybe shoot some things, and might be a bit of a story to it or something, and and that's not really the genre it's in.
But it feels like
oh, go ahead. I was going to say, I think there's also a little bit of conditioning with people's approach to arcade games and like their pass to it. I played arcade games in the arcade, and my money was very precious. And so the idea of continuing became the antithesis of the game. You don't continue the game. If you're going to play it again, you start over from the start and use it as a practice to get up to go further. But if you have been grown up on home port console versions or emulators where you have unlimited credits, you can just pour them in by pressing F1 or something, you probably have almost a different perception of what arcade games even are.
But even then, like, usually they're things that you play them for, in short bursts. Maybe you do a big marathon, but you come back and you play the bits that you enjoy. And that replayability feels like it's really significant for the type of game that we're talking about, maybe.
Yeah, it's probably partially related to that. I don't know. I found that too myself. Like some of the reasons I've moved away from the big game stuff, aside from the whole shift in the industry with some of the larger companies and stuff like that, but is just the replayability of some of the games and stuff like that. A lot of the major story-driven games and stuff. It's like once you're through the kind of main campaign, it was like, well, that's the game, and there's not really anything else to do in it. But you get something like Cactus or some of the other games where they're focused more on the gameplay, and some of them have a lot of replayability, even though the story might not be as strong.
Yeah, I mean that was actually a big part of why the story is the way it is as well. Is that and why it's interesting. A lot of reviewers have picked up on the fact that Cactus's story is quite shallow, but the depth is more to the characters. So it's more about the character's arc than the actual story arc, I guess. Which was intentional because I imagine people were going to spend more time and more investment with their character than they were with the ship. They're going to care more about who Holly or Shiitake is than they are going to care about whether they can save the Genki Star, because ultimately once you finish the game you go, yep.
Yeah, I think that was done well too. I mean, you get that sense of connection with the different personalities and different styles and that too. People probably are all playing their androids that they connected with kind of the most, I would imagine.
Yeah. I mean, character diversity is like, since I first touched Cactus at the first PAX Australia, the character diversity has been like the thing that stands out to me the most as being like a lot of work and something that's really well executed, but B, also something that's just like really appealing and makes the game accessible from different angles. With each character playing so differently, if you gravitate naturally towards Coral, then you gravitate naturally towards Coral, and it doesn't feel like you're kind of forced to play as one particular character.
Yeah, that's why I never get the people with the Liquorice comments
Yeah.
that are showing up now on the boards too. It's like, they complain about the slashes and the vorpal blades and stuff, and it's like, okay, well, if you just don't like that playstyle, don't play her. Like, she wasn't made to be some character where, you beat the game and then you have to play Liquorice. Like,
Well, she wasn't made to be
be
like a core part of the story of these characters coming together anyway.
Yeah.
Like, you look at her
Like,
boss
like,
dialogue, and
people-
she's clearly, outside the bounds of the game's plot. Or having her playable is.
Yeah, I like that though, how that's tied in with the story at the end, because I was wondering that too when she unlocked it. It was like, oh, how are they going to do that with the story? But then it's like they're doing her cleanup, run basically.
Yeah,
So
I like
haven't
it. It's
finished
fun.
with the
But it's hard to see it as something that's
Yeah, I like-
central enough to the game to warrant being upset about.
Yeah, it's kind of weird. Like the controls, I know, like the knife is a little bit tricky to use, but then a lot of parts of Cactus and the game and games in general do that.
Yeah, I feel it's fine. Like, I mean, it's got some, kind of technical points to it, but I don't find it's anything kind of too far kind of different from any of the other androids, I guess. Like, they've all got their kind of things that you can learn about them to improve their gameplay.
Yeah, there aren't many characters that
And
you just walk up to and immediately get everything there is to know about them.
And the interesting thing about Liquorice is she was simultaneously designed as a potential playable character and a boss encounter. Her secondary weapon, in particular, was like, it still uses the same timings and same kind of effects as in both versions. Like, the only conceit is that when you fight her as an android, she'll always fully charge her vorpal blade.
Yeah.
But otherwise, she's literally the same character.
Yeah, if she had the multi-slashes in Collider, I think that would be brutal.
Oh yeah, I was almost tempted to like, what if in multiplayer she can just start doing like short slashes, and I wrote, oh no, that would be horrible. I've seen a one shot four players at once enough.
Do you feel like maybe there's an expectation that the final character you unlock is meant to be overpowered and give this kind of... there is something rewarding about being overpowered sometimes in some games, and maybe that's what people are looking for when they give that kind of feedback on Liquorice.
The funny thing is, I've seen heaps of people describe her as overpowered. Like in streams, they'll say, "Oh, well, this character is clearly broken," and like, but I guess that's okay because she's the final unlock. And I'm sitting there thinking, "No, she's fine. We've balanced her. I'm okay with how she plays."
Yeah, I find it really challenging to use.
Yeah,
but I appreciate that.
Yeah, I'm still figuring some things out with her, but I think she's going to be in about the range of, sort of Coral, Shiitake scores on most places. Like, she's got that potential to be a really high scoring android. But she's certainly not, like, way out of line with all the others.
Yeah, but under certain circumstances, she can feel powerful. The first time you shut down Embryo and one-shot him in the one phase is great.
That was one of the few challenges, achievements that I thought, would be one of the sort of harder to get ones, because doing it normally with any of the other ones, you had to like really have on-point timing with your with the shutdowns and the switches and everything. And then the first time I tried it with Liquorice, it was like, oh, okay, well, I guess not.
That was almost a cheat, I guess, but I wanted that achievement in actually because it was one of those ones that I'd do enough just when I was trying to get good times against Embryo that I thought it was kind of interesting, and I wanted other people to discover it.
Yeah, there's definitely some nice things with that. That was in Transparent Balloon we were talking about the strategy that he used to get his ridiculously high score on there. That you had to have such perfect timing with that so that you could get that blue shutdown, just to be able to even use that sort of strategy on Embryo.
Yeah, it's funny to see...
My favourite achievement still... Sorry.
I was just going to say very quickly, it's funny to see the people who are going for particularly high boss scores usually restart immediately so that they can skip the dialogue intro, which changes the timing of everything.
Yeah, I do that too. It doesn't. In level, it wouldn't matter like to your run, but it's just I use like the sounds and stuff from like the androids falling in and the bosses falling in and sort of the setup sounds and stuff like that to sort of time some of my initial moves, and then so it's when you don't get those sounds, it's like
I did anticipate that. That's why you can disable the dialogue in the options menu.
Yeah, I'm still actually. I was saying earlier, I've got probably about I think I'm down to like 6 levels now that I have to finish off S+, and like most of them are just finishing off Shiitake. But once I do that, I'm going to take the boss dialogue off, because then at that point I'll have seen it all. But yeah, still until I finish that off, I still get it on, and I just use the restarts too.
What was the casting process like for getting the characters for the voices?
So for the androids, we started by recording people we knew, obviously. So as indie developers, that's what you do.
Was that intended to be scratch dialogue, or was that an attempt at getting end voices?
Oh no, that was an attempt to put voices in the game. We originally started with, if you remember the demo and for the early version of Early Access, we had robo voices. Synthetic voices generated, and that was just so that we could actually figure out which callouts should be vocalized and which shouldn't. We learnt some things like we found that we had like weapon up, I think, every time you leveled up, but we scratched that and just kept the weapon max, because ultimately you didn't need to, you could tell that your weapon leveled up, and the only piece of information, the maximum. So we left that as a vocalization and cut the other ones out. So we added a couple more. We added more I think we added one for the battery. There was the battery gone as to be a reminder that you let the battery expire. So we used the robo voices to kind of narrow down on what felt right and how much talking was too much talking and all that kind of stuff. Then we started recording friends, and I think we recorded Jeff's daughter as Cactus at one point. But there was two problems. One was that the performance wasn't strong enough. Like it felt a little bit too kind of amateur, and also too Australian, which is the final thing. Is that
Kind of sad on some levels.
it's kind of weird. Yeah, it's kind of weird being an Australian developer and going, no, that sounds too much like Neighbours. Can't do that. In hindsight, we should have at least found one person who could and we should have kept at least one Australian android in. But that's never mind. But the actual casting process, we ended up working with a company. We originally started working with Australian companies, but they're very expensive, which sounds horrible, right? And so we ended up getting contacted by a place in San Francisco. And they'd done a lot of video game voice acting stuff, and knew what they were doing. They actually do a lot of the voice recording for Telltale games.
Right.
So they've worked with big and small companies and understood that our budget was very, very modest, and that basically we would want to do what we could to reduce costs. And they were willing to work with us to make sure that we could get good bang for our buck, but also not ultimately, you can't just ask someone to do more for less, but you can reduce the task to make it more streamlined. So we had minimal people on board. There'd normally have been a larger crew working on stuff. It was just a thing. And obviously, because we had our script very closely worked out, it meant we could really cap the amount of time that we needed voice talent for. And then the casting, we actually, I put together a pitch document which outlined all the characters and had a couple of example lines of dialogue. They weren't actually call-outs from the game. They were more like personality lines that reflected what the character was about. And they put out a casting call, and so we got back a bunch of basically, readouts where people had gone through and read through the lines and as they interpreted it, kind of thing. And then me and Jeff, over a while, whittled the list down and compared notes and basically settled on a cast that way.
Had you had a voice in mind for Cactus? Because I mean, the character has existed for far longer than the game has. Yeah.
Well, that was a lot of it. It was trying to pick, for most of them, we had a reasonable idea of what we wanted them to sound like. It was that as you're listening through the casting, you're going, yeah, that's getting a bit close, that's getting a bit thin. Interestingly enough, I seem to be picking the more kind of Jeff was always picking the more I guess kind of lower pitched voices and the kind of the stronger voices. Well, I think I was almost favoring some of the more anime performances, I think, which was interesting because I think Jeff was right, and I like the picks we went with. But yeah, it was important for Cactus to have a sense of bravado and cockiness, and she does it and Holly had to have that kind of weariness slashed with she's being put upon. It's funny actually because in the cutscene she sounds yes, but it's great. I was listening to the lines as we were recording them and thinking, ooh, that's getting a little bit kind of. She actually sounds a bit kind of snarky there, but I'm okay with this, so that's alright. New character.
Yeah, no, she's good.
Yeah, I think the way those two came out in the cutscenes and stuff actually turned out really good.
Yeah, I got an idea for another piece of fan art that I'd like to do. That's Cactus and Holly and riffing on that both line.
But it was the cutscenes were very indulgent in that sense. But actually the interesting thing is I say indulgent, but I had a very, very specific purpose for the cutscenes. Every line, every action, every moment in each of those cutscenes is actually designed to sell something about the game or establish something about the game that's actually useful for when you're playing the game. Which sounds a bit kind of funny, but yeah. It's Cactus's approach to the solution, the ship, when she like turns and steers into the ship is literally saying, when faced between lasers and escape, you should choose to head into the lasers. You know, that's actually a game direction. The character interactions are trying to sell who they are in as short a time as possible. It's like really hammering you over the head with what the game's about, what the themes are about, the world that you're going to inhabit. It was really interesting, actually, in that sense of comparing people that didn't see the cutscenes to people who do see the cutscenes, and whether they become better primed for what the game's about or not. But yeah,
I think because there were storyboards in there early on, right?
Yeah, I used them in that little little opening intro thing, the text.
And I guess the core of the plot that's conveyed there, and I guess most of the shots. I mean, it hasn't changed dramatically. As far as I can remember,
the storyboards were drawn up in like 2013, and
right.
That was
Welcome back.
And they ended up being what we made the cutscene with. Oh, hello.
Hello.
We're just talking about the impact of the
part...
cutscenes on the game.
Yeah, the only part I found out about that was that in the cutscene you get Coral, who kind of hides behind Lemon there when Cactus crashes in, and I was like, considering Coral is supposed to be a kind of combat-oriented, android, it seems like it should have been the other way around. But
I always felt that Coral was sort of pulling Lemon out of the danger zone a bit. That was a vibe.
Yeah. If you look closely, Coral's actually trying to drag Lemon. Lemon's had a moment of kind of freezing up, and Coral's like, physically get over here, while Holly's actually in safety and going, get the hell out of there, kind of thing. But it happens very quickly. Coral actually falls backwards from the impact, but she was previously pulling on Lemon's arm.
Okay. I've only watched it twice, so when I saw it the first time, I didn't notice where Holly was, and then the second time I was watching it, I was like, where is Holly?
I watched it a lot. First time I had the opportunity to see it, so I might have picked up on it a little bit more than the average first time viewer would. But
it's
no, go ahead.
I was just saying, it's quite tricky trying to sell a lot of stuff in a very... Because I didn't want the cutscenes to be long, because one, it takes longer to produce, and two, they risk losing people's attention. At PAX, the first time we showed them publicly, PAX Prime, I was sitting there like biting my knuckles, watching people watch the cutscenes. I'm thinking, they're too long, they're going to lose people. Oh no, what's going on?
What kind of reception did you have when people saw that for the first time?
It was good, I think. Some people, like, it was interesting watching people watch them, and they would laugh at the right points. They'd laugh at the ship impact point, they'd laugh at the both. That was good. Some people would actually immediately discover that you could skip the cutscenes and skip them, and that was also like, correct, good, that's okay.
Yeah, some people, especially with this genre, I guess some people aren't in it for the story, I guess.
Yeah. I think one person said they weren't into Cabbage Patch Kids characters, but that's alright, I'll accept that one.
Yeah, the anime influence.
What a shame! Because if they had just played long enough to unlock normal head mode, they would have enjoyed it.
It's like what I was saying before about people who come in and they like... work as hard as they can to unlock FPS mode because they feel that that's going to be the thing that they enjoy about the game, and it's like, well, that's not what the game is.
Oh no, yeah, I feel really bad about that. It's funny though, the things that I find I'm more sensitive about, like if someone comes in and says, oh, I'm not into this game because I don't like, fake anime trash or something, I'd be like, oh yeah, no, that's fair enough. But if they came and said, I don't like this game because I think the battery is badly designed, it's like, hang on a moment. Hang on. Hang on.
It must be a difficult thing to address, because it's a conscious decision that you've made, and it's a conscious decision that you've had to defend as long as players have had access to the game. I would say.
I find the same thing, like on the forums when people complain about the battery, because that was what originally drawed me into the forums to chat about the game, was people complaining about the battery, like when it first came out, and I was like, people, I was like, you guys just aren't seeing something here or something, because, you know, like, you couldn't just take the battery out of Cactus. Like, if you tried to make it a point life system, it would be a lot harder than it is currently, and people seem to be, you know, under the assumption that, oh yeah, you can just take the battery out and, you know, not have it, and have infinite lives and still have it be the same game. And it's like, it totally wouldn't.
I see people saying, oh, you know, I want to just focus on score and not on battery and stuff, but the way that everything is in the game is that if you are getting the battery, that's the kind of gameplay you need to get the best scores.
Yeah, it definitely is. And like, even if the battery didn't have score attached to it, you know, it's basically trying to set you up into being a more, you know, kind of
aggressive
in
player.
the action, yeah, aggressive style of play.
Yeah, it's and it's that and the game length one are interesting, because to me both of those comments reflect not quite understanding the game.
Well, the genre too, I think. Some of the people who were talking about other games in the genre, and they, you know, wanted to sit back and play. It's like, what other game in this genre can you do that in? Like, you can't do that in Geometry Wars. You can't do it in Waves. You can't do it in like any of the other, you know, like you know, major kind of names in the genre. Like even the minor ones I can think of are usually like small single level arena style twin stick shooters where, you know, the level doesn't change and you just get assaulted from like every angle by enemies. You know, like you can't do that in this genre.
It comes back a little bit like to what we were saying before about Cactus having or carrying for new players in their eyes that it, there's a lot of genre trappings that that people immediately try to apply to it or use to understand it and judge it, that might set them on the wrong path or might give them the wrong idea about what the game is trying to do.
I don't know. I feel like in a way that's where the demo really, you know, shows off what it actually is, you know, supposed to be about. But
yeah, definitely.
I don't know. People just don't seem to find that out, I guess. Well,
the demo button on Steam isn't particularly prominent, and there are so many games that don't have them that if you didn't know it was there, you would never come across it.
Yeah, that's
true. I find it an interesting thing in games, actually, the whole how much you can trust a game. Certain games demand trust because they're large, and you know everyone's going to give Halo a fair shake, right? Even if they do something really dumb in it, because it's Halo.
A poor game. I don't like it at all. I think it's really weak.
Yeah. I picked that example very specifically, but what I mean is that they'll give it a fair shake. Like, people will pick over it and pick out bits that are good about it. No one's going to dismiss it out of hand, is what I mean.
Right.
Even if the next Halo is rubbish.
I'm not a big FPS fan myself, but I've played them, and my brother's a massive fan of them. But I've checked out like every single one of the stories, though, because I do have a really interesting background to the world they've kind of set up with that universe.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
I was a bit of a Bungie fan before Microsoft acquired, Bungie. And so I kind of had a little bit of awareness of what the game was hoping to be during development, and it did kind of feel like it didn't reach the kind of game that was initially planned. I mean, this stuff happens all the time, but it's always easy when you can blame Microsoft for pushing things out the door too early. But yeah, that led me to like be a little bit more critical, I guess, and a little bit more willing to judge the game on what came out the other end, rather than just be excited about how amazing it is to have a first-person shooter on a console or whatever.
But I guess what I mean is that when you play a game and you don't get what you expect, or you get something that is against your expectations, there's a thing of how much tolerance do you have? How much are you willing to believe that the designers and developers of the game knew what they're doing and you just don't understand it yet, versus writing them off? And all games have a different measure for this, right? Because there are games you should write off and say, no, they didn't know what they were doing.
Yeah, that part, for sure. I think that's part of what Cactus gets blamed for on the forums a fair bit, where some people are talking about, the way the Liquorice, especially with the secondaries and stuff like that. And it's like, if you play with it a little bit, it's actually pretty, well thought out.
It might be
or
just
people
the
coming
circles
in
that I move in, but I feel like this is like, it's not so much about people trusting a game or trusting a developer. It's like, I see a lot of people say that anything, it's if they don't like it, then that means it's poorly designed. Like, it's not a case of trying to think about what the intentions were and whether or not they were successful in, or whether or not the developer was successful in executing what they were trying to do. It's more about if a game is good, if a game is objectively good, then I must like it, and if I don't like it, then it's not good in any sense. It's like, it feels like people aren't encouraged to own their own tastes anymore.
Yeah. There's that as well, where people will use the term badly designed for I didn't, I struggled with something, or I didn't like it, because presumably anything that is well designed they would like, because they like well designed things. It's a circular reasoning that doesn't allow any sort of growth.
It's sad though, because that's really reductive, and it just massively stomps on any opportunity for diversity. If you can't celebrate the existence of something you don't like, then you're making a very narrow world.
Oh, massively. And it's like I remember there was one point where people were identifying Meltdown as like, Meltdown has online multiplayer or something like that, and it's like, that's great, go play Meltdown. It's a very different game. It's got a very different approach to it, actually, which is hilarious, because on a passing cosmetic level and on a themic level, they're both about like trying to shut down rogue AI cores and kind of stuff, and they're both attractive looking twin stick shooters. But yeah, at its heart, it's a totally different game. It's not anywhere. It's not even in Cactus's genre, in my opinion. Like,
well, people bring up Alien Swarm as well.
Oh yeah, God, that one
quite
irks
the
me,
same
but
thing.
I can't really see it. Yeah, it's but I remember like there was that game. It was on the GameCube, Piano 3. It was Capcom, I think. Published by Capcom. Anyway. Does anyone remember that one?
No, I'm afraid I didn't see it.
But it was a slick-looking third-person shooter game with this character. She was like in white armor and she had these little sunglasses and stuff like that. And it was like mechs, and everything looked really cool about it. Lots of white mecha kind of design to it. But it played horribly until you realized it was a rhythm game.
Which game was that?
Piano 3. It was written P.N.03, I think.
Okay.
And basically, the whole game, you could run around and move like a third-person shooter, but it felt really janky, because the entire game was designed to be used. You had like a dodge button, so you could like cartwheel to the side, somersault backwards, all this kind of stuff. And the entire game was designed to be played, so you played it on the beat. So you're going kind of... It was almost like kind of... had shades of Necro Dancer or something, I guess. But like...
I love that game.
And once you got your head around it, everything clicked and it was glorious. It was this kind of like really slick, cool game where you'd leap out behind cover, shoot a robot, jump behind another one, cartwheel down a corridor. It was kind of... And it was like, oh, this is really cool. But... your first experience with it was, this doesn't play like a third-person shooter, which it looks like, and it's terrible.
Some of that is kind of a flaw in the game design in general, not letting players know that, like missing a tutorial or something of how it's meant to be played.
To me, it's
absolutely
super depressing
it's
if
a
people won't
miscommunication.
take the time to learn what something is on their own. Like, to, yeah, I don't know. I just kind of, I feel like saying that it's poor design to not directly communicate everything that's going on, like that excludes you from particular types of experiences. I mean, Gone Home, for example, masquerades itself as a horror game on the surface, and if you go in with that expectation, then it has the opportunity to have a different kind of impact. Like, you can be surprised about what the game is, compared to if somebody tells you all about it, you know?
Here's one for you. What's your take on Brutal Legend in that sense?
Like in terms of how do you describe it as a game?
In terms of how it went, in terms of its perceived gameplay versus
it's
what
hated
it really was.
for what it is. I enjoy it because I don't have any expectations. I'm just like, I'll judge this game based on what it is, and yeah, I think it's okay. It's alright. It's a little bit clunky in terms of interface and controls, but you know, that's okay for something that's trying to blend things in ways that they might not have been really blended before.
Aw, you're so kind to Double Fine. Seriously though, I mean, here's a game that looks kind of like a first-person controller-based action game, right? Or
third person.
All of a sudden, a third-person action RPG kind of thing with some vehicles and the rest of that, and there's some exploration elements, and then suddenly, hi, here's an RTS. It was very shocking and very jarring to suddenly have this kind of different combat than what was already kind of thrown at you before.
I'm not downplaying the value of expectation management. I just feel like that it doesn't always have to be about communicating exactly what the game is, and that allowing people to discover stuff can be cool and compelling.
Oh, we discovered it.
I thought it was actually pretty well done in Brutal Legend. I mean, the way the RTS stuff was introduced, it wasn't just a full-on RTS. It was like, you know, okay, this is the first part, and this is how easy it is, and then they kind of added on to it. So I think the presentation, even though it was jarring to people that weren't expecting it, you know, they could at least go through it if they knew what it was.
And you gotta kind of also make sure that your game is accessible to people who don't understand or have experience with existing games that might set expectations, you know, like if you've got a game and you're trying to communicate that this is the same as every other top-down twin-stick shooter, then you're immediately requiring a whole bunch of culture and experience that a player might not necessarily have. So you've got to be able to take expectation management or view expectation management from both the informed side and the not so informed side.
So the reason why I thought Brutal Legend was such an interesting case study was because that was a case where EA literally mandated advertising as a third-person action game.
Oh yeah.
Up until release. So it wasn't just a, oh, what were you expecting? It was there was actually kind of someone decided to lie to players because they thought they could market it better as a third-person game than they could as what it actually was. Which I thought was... I remember experiencing that feeling of bait and switch. I did not appreciate it. Even though I like RTS games, and I like third-person action games, and I like Double Fine games, but somehow...
I didn't play the game until it was released on Linux as well, so... It wasn't like I had been following any of that initial marketing stuff.
I suppose people that were really looking forward to playing multiplayer with it were probably highly disappointed. I think that the RTS multiplayer was not well done in that game at all.
Yeah, no, I'd go with that.
But yeah, it's but I mean, expectation management is totally on the developers' side as well. It's I guess the two sides. There's the there's the developers need to communicate clearly what's going on and setting up expectations, and there's also the user's willingness to bend and, I guess, trust. This is where it gets back to the trust idea, where you can only... you have to trust a game to a certain extent. You have to trust that it's not going to waste your time, otherwise you might as well walk away. And that length of trust will depend on your relationship with the developer, what you've heard about the game, what the ratings are saying, all these other factors, and all vary from game to game.
Yeah.
I suppose what I was getting at originally is that I was one of those people that fell into the battery trap in Assault Android, and I think a lot of it was just because, not understanding the mechanic and assuming that the battery is just always random and nothing you can do is going to affect it, and maybe just not having something there on screen to tell you, hey, the battery is coming if you do this or whatever, then that's kind of what a lot of new players come into it with. But granted, I'm not a huge fan of that kind of genre, so it was hard for me to get into it in the first place.
Did you find that you kind of got past that? Or
it's not a standard...
That it kind of blew off the game?
I mean, that wasn't like the deal breaker. It was just in general the genre wasn't really something I was going to be able to do much with, but it was something that definitely stood out to me, and now hearing you guys talk about it and say that if you kind of followed it through and trusted it and you would have at least understood how it worked, and it's like, well, I probably should have done that, but it just at the initial opening it's like there was no indication that was even the thing.
Well, we lost Sylaris. It looks like Pulse just exploded. I imagine he'll probably be back in a bit.
Oops.
If anyone's wondering why he's gone quiet.
Yeah, but that's a really interesting point though. Like thinking about how to indicate something. It's almost like you want to say, don't worry, this will make sense later. But you literally can't say that because a user wouldn't have any reason to believe you, for instance. And it's really hard to communicate. It's tricky. People fall into the category. Some people relentlessly read the tutorial text and take in every word, and some people don't as well. And we struggle with like how to make a game that basically doesn't require the tutorial but also has a tutorial.
Yeah. You don't want to have to hold somebody's hand through the whole thing and let's get frustrated with all that. So yeah, it's hard.
But like, I can only talk about the things that I find rewarding and the things that I, got from the game. But learning the patterns, or like the emergent patterns that the game has, and discovering those and feeling like I was discovering those, that was something that I found really rewarding. And I just wouldn't have that experience if the game was more directed about explaining its mechanics.
Yeah. And that's, I think, part of the allure to people that like that kind of pattern learning games. That's very true to pretty much any bullet hell touch style game. That that is the fun of it, is trying to figure out the pattern and getting into it. So I suppose that's kind of if you're not going to enjoy that anyway, then it's probably a good idea that's not trying to force you into it.
I like to use Necrodancer and Spelunky as good examples of that sort of thing as well. Like, they don't really give you a lot of direction about the specifics of what goes on, just the generic game, core gameplay mechanics. Or it's more about the controls, I guess, than the mechanics, as far as it directly tells you about. But over time, like you pick up on some of the emergent patterns in the procedural stuff, like in Spelunky. You start to recognize patterns in the way that the levels form, or in Necrodancer you start to intuitively know where a hidden room might be,
Yeah.
Yeah, there was an interesting element of that in Cactus as well, because early on I ruled out the idea of having any kind of lock and key gameplay where certain weapons or certain characters are required to beat or best against certain encounters. The idea was that all weapons and all things are viable against everything, but just different. They had different properties because everything had different properties. And so the specific one I struggled with was, how do I explain in the tutorial what the flamethrower does? Because what does it do? It just does damage more. But it's also essential to know that you should use the flamethrower when you're in situations where you need to use it. But the situations you need to use it are flexible and variable and depend on your own playstyle. So I ended up coming up with the contrived example of destroying the red keg. But then I was faced with the problem of, do I make it so the tutorial will only advance if you switch weapons and take out the red keg with a flamethrower? What if you shoot it with the machine gun? Do I stop the red keg from dying if you shoot it with the machine gun? Because now I've taught you something that's not true in the game. Do I make the red keg respawn in unlimited number of times until you destroy it with the flamethrower? Because that might just confuse you.
I think that raises an important point, is that when you are trying to do tutorials and you are trying to instruct things, that there are like so many potential mixed messages that you can give people, and that being able to explain stuff is an art in itself, I think.
I think it helps just to layer it and have, like, you know, the most simple use of something, and then add something a little more complex, and add something a little more complex until they can kind of grasp how things change.
Yeah, I think the difficulty curve of the levels definitely is a good example of that. The early levels are really easy if you go back to them after playing for a while, but at the time still feel challenging.
Yeah, it's something that we were talking about earlier, as we had when we were sort of doing the event, was that we had people with a mixed series of skills, and there were people who hadn't ever gotten an S+, and there were people who hadn't ever beaten Justice. And for those of us who've done it, we reflect on it and we kind of go, oh, you know, it's kind of easy to do this, this, and this. But we can also remember the point in time when Embryo was an impossible hurdle for us, you know, and that it did take us, you know, a lot of practice and a lot of attempts to be able to master these things.
Yeah, this was a huge thing about the game for me, actually, was that you would feel yourself just getting better at the game, and that seemed like a big reward. Effectively, it wasn't that I would dole out experience points that you could equip to your firepower stat, but you would just go, oh, I remember when I used to struggle against this boss, and now I'm dancing with it. I'm trashing him for points. I'm running him down quick because I'm on to the next thing. And to me, that seemed like a really cool thing to give players, ideally.
Yeah, totally. But I love that. I love that I have the ability to go, yeah, man, I totally remember when Justice was kicking my ass, and it was something I couldn't do. Or I remember when I just couldn't get past Venom, and it wasn't until I think it was you suggested I do it with Lemon, and when I did, that got me into the right kind of mindset for trying to approach him and stuff. And now I'm getting close to an S+ with other characters, and but it feels like sometimes when those of us who have a lot of time in the game talk to newer players on the forums, there's not an understanding that we've been in the same situation of not quite grasping things or having trouble with stuff. I guess Sylaris is gone now, so he can't kind of comment on that. But I wish that there was a nice way that didn't sound patronizing to be able to kind of convey that, I've been there and you can get past it.
Yeah, it's because I watch people stream the game and play the game and experience the game for the first time a lot, so I get a lot of insight into how these things work. And I think for the most part, the difficulty people have with the game is more their play philosophy than actual like moment to moment skill. Once you're chasing high scores, it becomes about skill, and it becomes about, can you weave through bullets? Can you time this right? Can you land this thing? But at the start, you can actually do fine just by taking the right approach, just by staying aggressive, for instance. You can 100% beat Embryo as long as you understand that, 1, you have to use your secondary weapon, 2, you have to stay close to him. That's the 2 key rules for Embryo.
And those are kind of in line with the things that the game rewards in the normal levels as well, is that it's you stay close and you deal as much damage as you can, and that's what the game rewards you for.
Yeah, everything's consistent. Every lesson you learn throughout the game is applicable to the rest of the game. This was this massive rule that I had for myself and the design and stuff like that, was that I would never teach you to do something that was actually against your own interests or against the interests of the rest of the game. Everything had to converge on this kind of this optimal, aggressive wrecking ball style. And
I think this is why when you come back to things that you had trouble with before, that earlier bosses suddenly feel a lot easier than they were, even though you haven't been practicing them.
Yeah, it's kind of like wax on, wax off, right?
Exactly. Sylaris, I was just sort of saying a second ago, I was asking you a question and you weren't here. Was that sometimes it feels like when we talk to people in the forums, it feels like there's a bit of an expectation from new players on new players' parts that when those of us who have hundreds of hours in the game try to offer advice, that we've had the opportunity to learn all the mechanics through early access, and the game was simpler and less complex when we first got exposed to it, and kind of being able to see it iteratively evolve in a way that's not accessible to them has given us an edge that they'll never have. But I feel like talking to some of the players who hadn't played Embryo or hadn't S+ Embryo or hadn't beaten Justice or whatever, that I remember feeling that Justice was a wall that I couldn't get past, or I remember feeling that Embryo was this big challenge. Do you feel that way as well? If you've got your mic set up. Cheers, Nemoder. Oh, it sounds like Sylaris has got mic problems again.
Well, I can speak to that. I definitely feel that way. I definitely feel like the first time, especially, Nespula for a time, I couldn't figure out how to keep the swarm off me, and I was always trying to hit her directly when the swarm was out. And then once you discover that, okay, if you kill off the individual members of the swarm, that hurts Nespula, then you take a different approach to taking her down. And same thing with Justice. For the longest time, I thought there was just no way, especially that one, not the really thick beam, but the one that moves really quickly, that he kind of draws a tracer with. I thought there was no way to stay away from that, And then as you start to play through it, some of the things that you learn from that zone, and you start to pick that up as you go through it. But all of those definitely felt like that was a wall I was never, I still say that about Medulla. I don't think I'll ever beat Medulla. And I think that a lot of new players do come to it. They hit that point and think that, there's no way that they're ever going to get there either. And it's hard to convey to them that if you give it some time, if you're actually interested and you like everything else about it, when you get to that point, there's going to be a moment where it'll click in and you'll enjoy it probably as much as the rest of us do.
Yeah, or jump back and play the levels you do like playing, because it's all because of that property where everything is teaching you everything. It's like if you can play a previous level better, that'll help your boss play. But it's hard to communicate that in a game. Like to say this is a game where you can play the bits you like over and over again, and you'll get better, and then you can kind of push through the parts that feel like they were hard before.
Absolutely.
Which is why I was like shaking my head when people were asking if being able to skip the levels and go straight to the bosses was a bug, and I'm like, if you think about it, you should realize that you're only hurting yourself there. There's no, I don't know. I didn't think that was going to be a sticking point.
It's funny how you
I didn't even know it was possible.
Oh, hey, Hero. How you doing?
Hi.
It's interesting, the kind of expectations and impressions you build up. Thinking about Airscape in particular, I had the opportunity to play that and test it before release, and I was thinking, wow, the art style is super charming, and it's going to be loved for that, and the music is amazing, and it's going to be loved for that, and the level design is brilliant, and it's going to be loved for that. It turns out that lots of those things are things that people are specifically dismissive of, and I just had no thought or concept that it could have been that way. So it's kind of interesting to see what the expectations are versus the reality when you have the opportunity to sort of see behind the curtain and see things before release. I find it very difficult to predict where things are going to go.
Yeah, there's also, I think my first exposure to Airscape was, I think Daniel had already won the level up competition, the Intel demo competition, the thing this is pre PAX Australia, but even with that, when you're told this is an award-winning game, this is a game that people selected out of a lot of different games and said that this is the one they like the best. That's significant. You go, oh, so what is there to it? And I think that helps as well, because it primes you to go in thinking like, what's the value here? And when you look at Airscape like that, there's lots of value. You go, oh wow, it's charming. Oh yeah, it grows on me. Oh, the puzzles, they seem straightforward, and then you kind of get that kind of smile where you realize that, oh, actually, no, they're screwing me. Okay, oh god, there's mines. And it's like, and that made me appreciate the game a lot more, I think, from the start, which maybe other people didn't get.
You know, I don't know. I feel like Airscape as well, like a little bit like Cactus, is that you can't really get from a few videos and a trailer what it is that the game is doing. You kind of need to play it. You need to play it a lot to appreciate the amount of variation and thought and conscious design that's gone into the levels and creating interesting experiences. Otherwise, kind of like I feel like Cactus as well. Like when I first played the demo, I've seen people talk about the game and they're like, "Oh yeah, no, the game is all about this reconfiguring terrain. Like that's what the game is." And it's like, well, no, that's just the gimmick for a couple of levels. That's the character of the gameplay of a couple of specific levels. Like it's easy to form assumptions based on seeing just a narrow amount. I don't know where I was going with that. I sort of ended up rambling. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean that was something that came up really early on. Actually, was that people responded to influx stronger than any other level in the game, and I was actually a little bit worried. I didn't want that to become the game's identity, because it's part of the game. It's illustrative of a property that the game has, but it's not a gimmick, the floors change game, I guess.
Yeah, it's like it was the first level I played, and it kind of set up my initial expectations. But once I'd played, I guess the set of levels that launched with the early access version. Once I played that set, I went, okay, all right, I understand that each level has its own character and its own gameplay that kind of defines it in itself, and that a lot of the game is about providing you with different spaces to have different kinds of experiences.
I guess it's kind of like how Airscape is obviously very much uses its gravity, but it's not like the game's just going, ta-da, gravity. Like, that was its starting point, literally its starting point. And the actual game, the game that you play, is being built on top of that.
Right, yeah, I mean, it's like, I see people say that Airscape, just, again, from looking at trailers and looking at one or two people playing, they kind of feel like, oh, well, that, it does some gravity thing, other games have done gravity thing, it doesn't do anything interesting or unique. But the level design and the different variations on different types of gravity keep it feeling fresh the whole way through, I found. So like low gravity is different from the perpendicular to the ground gravity, which is different to the swimming behavior and different to zero gravity. So there are like all these different flavors of movement challenges that you have to deal with, or movement styles that you have to deal with, and then there are that's compounded with the actual level design providing you with specific movement challenges.
Yeah. Was it the Indie Game Movie had that great bit from Jonathan Blow talking about how one of the advantages of indie development is you can kind of mine concepts. You can kind of go a bit deeper. So rather than just having some tech, you actually then think about all the ways that it interacts or can be used or what it means, and really dig deep into it, which is something that indie developers can do, I think, better than AAA studios can, because indie has agility versus bandwidth. So we might not be able to get everything done really quickly, but we can focus our entire attentions on a problem, which is kind of cool.
Well, you can also like agility is like that kind of comes back to what I was saying before about being able to throw stuff in at the last second when you've got the kind of structure that a lot of large studios have. Everybody's got to sign off on everything, and you can't just go in and throw new textures in within a day of release. But agility also means that if you discover that there's something else aside from your original plan, that it's more fun over there on this side of the fence, then you can up a move and you can change what the game is with a lot less resistance and a lot less friction than you do if you have the bigger style of studio environment.
Yeah, I found a lot of advantage from being animator, artist, and programmer. Is that
you don't have to argue with everyone else.
Yeah, well, see, the thing is, you'd think that, but I still find myself arguing with myself because even though I'm taking on these different roles, and so I'm representing these roles internally, but it just means there's a really good bandwidth. It's like being able to understand what the other person thinks at the same time. So as a programmer, I'm thinking, this is difficult. I don't want to have to do this. But as an artist, I know why it's important. And I can figure out, like, if there were two different people, the artist would be saying, no, we absolutely have to do this. And the programmer would be saying, that's going to take too long. But because I'm both people, I get to see both sides of the argument simultaneously, so I can at least make a call. I can say, actually, no, we're going to go with the art side because, yes, it is that important. And I'll just suck it up and have to program it.
Well, it's like the visualizations in Zone 3. It's Zone 3, right?
Yeah.
Has the visualizations on the wall, and they're actually the music. And it's like, I think that's really cool, and I love that it's in the game. But in a lot of other contexts, you just go, yeah, effort versus reward, it's not worth it. But it was something that was important to you, and I imagine it's something that Jeff was excited by as well, and you guys did it. And the game is that little bit deeper for it.
The probably most indulgent one actually is that if you look really, really closely at Hilo, when you fail a level,
he gets a sad face.
He blue screens.
Oh, he does? Actually, I think I remember you mentioning that.
I had to write the shader slightly differently so I could do that. And it's like, could you imagine having to try to explain this to a third party that this is a good idea?
Can you imagine trying to get someone to sign off on the scope change to add that in?
Yeah. It's like, who's going to see this? Hopefully no one. But no, it's there.
I guess that comes back to like the whole art thing. Is that it's a form of creative expression, and whatever's important to you is whatever deserves to be represented. I guess as an artist, if there's something that you're excited about doing and about saying and about expressing, then having hurdles in the way of that is going to make your stuff less soulful. If you want to use that word again.
Yeah, although on the other hand, the other thing that's really important for art is limits. Limitations are massive for that kind of helping control scope, not control scope is the wrong way, but helping hone things. Because like without limits, you never are forced to decide what's important, I think.
Well, I guess you can have self-imposed limits that are kind of not as tangible as other limits that you might end up coming across in these kind of contexts.
Yeah, I think we always have limits. I mean, we have technical limits, we have self-imposed limits, we have all cultural limits. We have all these kind of different factors that stop us in different axes, which is fine, and you have to work within them. And sometimes they help you, sometimes they're restrictive, sometimes they help you grow, and all this kind of stuff. And it's I knew where I was going with this sentence when I started, and somehow I lost it. But
it's all right.
It happens to the best of us.
But it's interesting how all this stuff shapes the game, and you kind of have. That was it. Tension. This was his central pillar of Cactus. Actually, was tension, and I mean in the sense that you have multiple conflicting objectives that are pulling you in different ways. And to me, this is a really good trait to have in a video game, because without it, you will run into a min-max situation where you simply make one number big. And with tension, it's interesting because you're always asked to choose between two things that you want, and you can't have both. And that's not only a good place to be in for a dynamic game, but it's also a really natural state, I think. Like, we're constantly choosing that. Opportunity cost is huge. Just the ability to work on Cactus means that I can't work on a big Ubisoft game or something. And maybe I get more value out of working on Cactus, but I can't discount the value of not being on a big team, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I find when I work on projects with people, my desires are to collaborate and explore what that collaboration with those particular people, set of people means, rather than just wanting to have greater bandwidth or wanting to have more resources. Which is, like, I guess, possibly a different motivation for why a lot of studios exist, maybe, like, or the way that a lot of studios operate in terms of, growth and wanting to increase bandwidth and wanting to be able to produce stuff faster.
No, I think that's very true. I think the most productive way to work is effectively you have to, when you're working with a team, you have to understand what the team wants to do. I've always thought the best creative director, is one that operates like a membrane. Like their job is to basically take the output of their team and let through the best and reject the worst, kind of thing. But rather than trying to direct the project themselves, they end up basically being the facilitator for what the group unconsciously wants.
Yeah.
And that means working on a team means basically you're not there for other people to fulfill your objective. You're there to explore something collaboratively with them. And that happened obviously with Cactus. I'm the driving force behind Cactus, but Nart's design was like the reason why I collaborated with him is I wanted his design insight. I wanted what he was going to bring to the game. I wanted his understanding of what the levels were going to do. And Jeff has morphed the game quite a lot with his audio direction and what he wanted to do with the music and stuff like that. We had a sense that we wanted it to be this, pulse pounding action kind of thing, but he took that and ran with it, and that backwards reflects onto the game. He had ideas which made it back into the game. We had ideas that made it into his music. It was a real kind of back and forward flowing thing.
Yeah, it's like that. That's something I find as well, is that when I do collaborate with people, that there's, you end up with something emergent that you can't necessarily predict, because you have the ability to bounce ideas around. You have the ability to give, moment to moment feedback on what it is that you're creating, and what they can do the same for you, and something new and unique can come out of that. It's really cool. On the note of cons, which we kind of mentioned earlier, what kind of impact do you feel that... Because, again, something that surprised me about Airscape, and maybe a little bit about Cactus as well, is that I've had the ability to look at a couple of people play the game at conventions and stuff, and people seem super enthusiastic and super buzzed. Like, how much of that do you think translates into actual players and actual sales after a game is released?
See, I don't know. I think about it a lot. I think it's interesting that realistically, even with a big successful convention, and even with the game fully, like people playing at 4-player all convention, you're still putting through like a couple of hundred people, I think, in a convention, or it's not a huge number. Like, it's a huge number of people, of bodies, but in terms of sales, like, 1,000 sales is good, but if you sold 1,000 sales, that's pretty bad. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
you need to be aiming for much higher than that for what you would consider a commercial success, which is interesting. And
but
I guess
like,
what you're thinking,
can you use convention interest and excitement as a gauge for how well something's going to do?
Yeah, and I mean that's what I've been doing. Effectively, early access is a way to see how people that keep playing the game play the game. Like I can see how people who are into the game and are refining the game are doing. And conventions were great to see how people react to the game when they pick it up for the first time. So that was super useful as a game designer to see that two sides of it. I guess the other thing is you're hoping that it's the visibility. You're there for the press. In a lot of ways, the fact that there's people playing the game and having fun is more important to the person who's walking around and wondering what to write about than it is for, like, I like that there are people that have played at the conventions and have come and found us afterwards and have told us about it, or show up in the Steam forums and say, yeah, we saw it at blah and we played it and it was really fun, so we went and got it. And that's great, but in terms of overall impact, it's quite small, like direct impact. Versus a web page or like a news coverage is way bigger. It influences way more people, but it influences them in a much more shallow way. So it's interesting.
It's funny. I would have thought that that like attention at conventions would translate into guaranteed sales from people who were excited about the game, but also I assumed that there would be a lot of word of mouth propagation there from people who were like, oh, I tried this really cool game at a convention, I'm really excited about it, that kind of thing. But it doesn't seem like that propagates anywhere near as much as I was imagining.
I think it might be a critical mass thing. Certain things that get really excited and hype and then build up other hype and then other people come and see you, but I think the way that modern word of mouth and influencing networks and all this kind of stuff work is that it's kind of driven by I don't know any of this terminology because I don't follow it, but it's that kind of trendsetter type thing. There are certain people that when it hits their attention, they broadcast it to their followers and stuff like that, and it becomes a bigger thing. And so this idea of virality or whatever can seem really confusing, because on one hand you just go, oh, remember when Cutie Pie played what's it called and made it famous? But that's not how networks generally work most of the time. That's an aberration.
Yeah, for sure. Something I was thinking yesterday about like con exposure and the kind of impact that it can have is that conventions are very intense experiences. And that you can sit down and you can play one game and you can really enjoy it and you can be excited by that. But then if you sit down and play another game that you really enjoyed and you're excited by that, like how much of your attention becomes divided between those two things? Like how much of one sinks in, and can a positive experience be washed away by the amount of stuff that you try and absorb when you're at a con?
Oh, absolutely. I think that's a massive thing. And that comes down to especially journalists and other people who have the chance to cover conventions and talk about what they see at conventions. Because in a lot of ways, we are hoping that someone who writes these kind of things will come by and see the game and go, what's that? And wander over and play it for the first time and go, this game is amazing, I need to write about it. We had an experience like that. Ben Kachera came by at the first PAX Australia. And he was really blown away with the game. I think he came by as a whim. We'd contacted him from the press list and said, hey, do you want to check us out? All the big sites ignored us. So Ben Kachera is who was writing for the Penny Arcade report at the time.
Right.
Came by, played the game, loved it, and wrote this really nice glowing write-up about how it was a palate cleanser and it was this great experience he had at the convention. And that was one of our early major press kind of. It wasn't even major because he kind of wrote it as one of those I think it was more like an opinion-y type thing. It wasn't but it was interesting because at that point we'd really struggled to break into that sphere of big game coverage. We've been covered by a lot of the smaller sites and specialist sites and kind of sites that covered our kind of space, but we just got no traction with what we considered the kind of more mainstream sites. And that was like a rare case where someone saw us in the crowd, that wandered over and played it and said, wow, this game's great. But it doesn't happen very much.
Yeah,
was
it that PAX or was it the next PAX where I think it might have been Gabe came by and one of you guys offered him a key. He was like, "No, man, I'm totally buying this when it comes out."
Yeah, it was Tycho came by at the next PAX. Next PAX was it? Or yeah, there's
they
only
run
been
together, don't they?
There's only been how many PAX
so
Australias has there been? All right, was it the second PAX? There we go. yeah. Tycho came by and played the game for a bit, and we had a chat. And I offered him a key because as I tend to do. He was like, "Oh no, I'll get it." But
do you know if he did?
But we appeared on PAX TV, which is pretty good. So the PA TV or whatever, they did that Playdate thing, and that was really cool. For a while there, you could actually go onto pennyarcade.com, and there was a picture of Venom on their front page.
Oh, nice.
But yeah, it's super tricky. Like, I think there's been a lot of value. We've met a lot of people. We've interacted with a lot of developers. We've put the game in front of a lot of people. So it's been really valuable as developers. If we'd sent like random people out to demo the game for us, the conventions probably would make a lot less sense. But because we're physically on the floor and physically talking to people, it's really valuable, I think, as small developers. But I worry that it's probably not a good move just from a financial sales point of view.
Yeah, it's a so tricky thing. So Sylaris, are you back? A bit, sweet.
I guess so.
You're still fairly quiet, compared to everyone else.
Let me see if I can fix that.
Cool.
We're just loud people, is all.
It's so true.
That would be
Maybe
the
we're all
story
just
of my
deaf.
life anyway.
The question I was asking earlier, Sylaris, we'll try for a third time, was do you find I kind of feel when those of us who have kind of hundreds of hours of playtime in the game try to give some new players the idea or insight of how to play and how to find play rewarding. Do you feel like Cactus is kind of unique in that it's a game where like we're playing today and Hero goes, oh, justice is easy, and when you can do justice is easy, but when you can't do justice, it's quite a challenge. But as a player, I totally remember when justice was this brick wall that I couldn't get through. Do you feel like Cactus is different from other games in terms of your players being able to kind of remember and relate to the situation that beginners are in that regard?
I guess that's a bit different for each person, I guess, because I can see where people new to the game are coming from, but at the same time, like, I've never had a problem like that. Well, I shouldn't say never had a problem like that, but I've never had kind of that extent of the problem. I always had a background in shooters, so I kind of came into it, and my problem was more that I tried to apply other game mechanics to Cactus, which I had to break out of the habit of trying to do. And then, once I kind of got past that, I was like, okay, there you go. I figured out what I need to be doing and, how things work, and then everything sort of started to fall together with that. And then from there on, I never really had problems. Like, all the bosses have taken me, like, maybe half a dozen times to S+. So, like, I really haven't had much challenges in the game overall. But, from the bosses, anyway, some of the levels have actually been more of the challenging spots for me. as I was getting used to things and things like that. But I know, where you guys are talking about, stuff that, playing like Infinity Drive and stuff like that, and like where people have gotten an Infinity Drive, and and meanwhile, like I was saying before, I consider, for myself anyway, I consider it bad play if I have a death before Justice in Infinity Drive, and meanwhile, like probably the majority of people who are playing, are barely getting past Justice before they like completely run out of battery and die.
Yeah.
So there's a wide range, but that's always been kind of the thing with skill games, though. It's not I don't know, sort of not the growth of like kind of that progression of unlocking characters and unlocking extra guns and all that other sort of stuff. Skill games has always been like that. There's always going to be that gap there where people kind of just have to put in some practice and get better, and eventually you'll look back and see the kind of growth there. But
I kind of worry that
you have to kind of put in that
as an early access player that when dispensing this advice that some new players might be thinking, well, you've had the opportunity to observe the game's growth throughout development, so you've had the opportunity to gain this insight before the game was as complex as it is now, and so your opinions aren't necessarily valid about what a first timer could be feeling. But it kind of highlighted to me as well that, as far as I can remember, most of the bosses and possibly most of the levels, I guess, have been tuned down, like been made easier than their initial implementations. Is that correct, Tim? So I know Justice has been nerfed a little bit, and I know Medulla is toned down quite a bit.
I mean, I would more describe it as some of the corners have been smoothed off. Yeah, like for the most part, I try to practice the idea that, like, especially when I'm happy with the general feel of a level, if I add something that's going to make the level easier, I try to add something that also makes the level a little bit harder, just to kind of maintain the balance. But yeah, in general, most of the bosses have all had like small tweaks and nerfs and stuff that make them slightly more accessible, I think, over the course of development.
Yeah, I don't think anything's really gotten too different as far as the mechanics and stuff go. But, like skill games in general, that's always the thing with skill games is, there's going to be a certain level where people always have to put in some work to kind of get up with them. But, like, personally, I don't think if I would have come into Cactus now and, started playing, I probably would have gone through basically about the same sort of setup. I would have jumped around levels a little bit, and probably would have gone through the bosses, jumped through levels a little bit, and kind of found spots where I had problems, and then probably would have just died on those levels a bunch of times until I kind of broke my my bad habits I had from other games, and then kind of been in the same area where I am now, where I would have been looking at the mechanics a little more detailed.
It does feel like Cactus has been fairly consistent, like gameplay wise, across its early access existence, which is not necessarily what a lot of people might have expected to come from an early access game.
I've been reading quite a bit about the and I've realized there's been a little bit of this, but it came up recently with the Darkest Dungeon stuff, but the tendency for early access games to just grow more and more difficult as the fan base that's been with them from the start basically asks for harder and harder challenges, which eventually escalates it out of the skill level of any kind of beginner, and basically ends up making the game more inaccessible. And I guess with Cactus, I always had a fairly strong idea of where I wanted the skill thing to sit, and I always wanted to have a low skill entry and a high skill ceiling, which I think offset a little bit of that. Because while people could debate how to get the best S+, they're not debating whether the level was too easy to beat, I think. Except for the people that wanted the battery turned off.
Yeah, but I think it's done a good job with that. Like I was saying before you had joined, that I had posted a review about it because you're always going to have those crazy people. So I was like, oh yeah, I'll put my good review in, kind of, right. But when I had made it, I had said something about how it was accessible to new people, but still had a high ceiling for scores and stuff. And then some people disagreed with that, downvoted my review, and I was like, why? Like nobody comments on it, of course, but I mean, it is very accessible for people who haven't played the genre, really.
Yeah. Well, that was a weird thing, and something that's been backed up at cons, actually. It's actually really easy to... Well, for one thing, it's really easy to get people to play a twin-stick shooter, because you just... You wave them over and you say something like, hey, do you remember Smash TV or something like that? And people will kind of have a little look. But it holds people's attention really well. It's really good. The fact that it's multiplayer is really good because you see a lot of guys wandering around with their girlfriends, and the girlfriend looks a little bit disengaged, kind of thing. And you can go, no, you're playing as well, kind of thing. And it's like, it's not a game that relies on, because it doesn't have that many buttons, and instead it just relies on the gameplay flow. I think it's a lot easier for people that have any kind of interest in gaming to pick back up in that sense. And we've had a lot of success getting people in that don't think themselves as being that kind of gamer and then getting into it.
Do you feel like co-op has this kind of like, for people who haven't played before, do you feel like co-op is less accessible than single player?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Because I watch people play, and it feels like it's easy for players to not realize that they're not making damage, or like an individual player, like it's easy for them to not understand that they have to output a certain amount of damage to keep everything rolling, and that everybody kind of blames the person who fell down rather than the person who wasn't killing anything.
Yeah, that's the thing. You're watching it and you're going, you're aiming at the wall and not using the secondary weapon. You're the hole in this team, but the guy that got knocked down because he went straight up into the face of Embryo, he's actually the hero holding it down. So that's a little bit tricky. It's definitely harder to sell and make the cause and effect evident in multiplayer.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot going on.
Yeah. Which...
don't even think just in multiplayer, but even in single player, I think that's how battery gets such a bad kind of rap, is because people are expecting it to be a little more, I don't know, based off random numbers or something. I don't know exactly there, but they just don't kind of notice that it's actually fairly planned out. And if they adjusted their playstyles, they could fix their problems with it.
Well, the game does a lot to heighten tension when you need battery as well. So it feels like, subjectively, it feels like all hell is breaking loose, but really the game's kind of making you think that you have less battery than you have, and it's dropping down the battery score threshold and stuff, and it's making things easier, but the tension is there, and you kind of feel like it's a bigger danger than it actually is. And that worry in itself is totally a big thing, I think. We've said that focus, like, Cactus requires this amount of focus that you don't necessarily realize at first, like where a couple of us were talking earlier about how we were streaming for the first time, or a couple of the experienced players were streaming for the first time, and I just kind of couldn't handle the focus divide of being on stream, at the same time. It was a really unexpected hurdle.
Yeah, well, me and Transparent Blue were talking about that because he was saying I should stream more, but I know when we were talking about us streaming, it was the same thing, because, like, neither of us have, like, the sort of new player tunnel vision, and, when I play twin-stick shooters, I don't focus on any one thing for very long. I kind of, like, scan around the area and then, registering attacks and stuff and going, okay, yeah, I gotta move for that, and then I'll, like, go scan around for the next thing to happen. And then so when I was streaming, and, I figured, oh yeah, I'll just be able to, like, kind of glance over at the chat and glance back, and I should be able to handle that, because I glance all over the place anyway, and I totally couldn't do it.
Yeah, it's a really interesting thing. But I think that, to me, that highlights that that Cactus does require just that little bit more focus than you might at first realize.
It also requires a constant focus, which is common in your arcade style, your top-down shooters, your geometry wars kind of stuff. they're fairly standard in that, like, a moment's inattention will wreck your ship, or something bad will happen, or you'll drop your chain, or whatever you don't want to have happen will happen. But it's not usual in your Gatling gears, or something that's a bit more paced, or has more of a, or like what's it called, that 40k kill team or whatever that was, where you can basically, once you've cleared out a bunch of enemies, you could potentially just like take your time to wander around and then choose to wander into the next area. While Cactus is geared more like a top-down shooter where the screen's scrolling, in that it's just always coming at you, effectively. I mean, that's the quality of arena shooters, but yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that catches people by surprise.
Yeah, that's fair. I think some of the new people coming in kind of should check out the demos a little more to, know what they're actually getting into, but where they seem to come into it thinking they can do that sort of, that 40k thing like you're talking about, where they could kind of clear out an area and sit back and relax a bit or something, is like, that doesn't really work in these.
I don't like, that might be viable for some games, but I get the distinct impression that that's not the game that Cactus is trying to be.
Yeah, and that was a big reason why most of the levels are 2 to 6 minutes kind of thing. They're intense. You rush to the end, but then you can relax at that screen clear.
Yeah. No, but it's like that for pretty much all twin stick shooters. Though they're not really the genre to have that sort of relaxed pace, casual sort of gameplay, I guess you could say.
Yeah, no, it's totally true.
But I don't know, that's always one of the benefits of this genre. I find from all the people who typically play the genre, that's usually they're playing it for the challenge or for the kind of rush of the game, and not to just have something to sort of sit back and pick things off at a kind of reduced pace. I think that's where the people with the battery thing too were kind of a bit against odds there with what the game was trying to do, because the whole no battery thing is trying to turn it into a game where you can just sit back and not have to worry about anything and take your time and do what you want in the levels basically, and it's like, yeah, that's not really the whole goal.
Yeah, and I kind of the only kind of compelling argument that I've seen for something that might to me as a player justify having some ability to tune or turn down the batteries. Like, there was one guy I talked to, and he's like, I really want to play this co-op with my kids, and they're not good enough to play as it is. It would be really nice to just have something that had less pressure so that I could enjoy playing it with them. And that's not the game that this is, but that I guess that story touches me in a way that kind of goes, well, that really is sad. Yeah, and I've run into people with similar experiences, and it's one of those things that I think about, like, what's the right solution for this? And the thing that gets me actually is that I don't think the battery alone is the problem, because I know exactly what will happen. At the moment you turn off the battery and you're playing with small children that are having trouble playing the game, they're going to find they're constantly in a loop of knockdown resurrection. Because that's just what will happen. There'll be too many enemies on the screen, there'll be bullets flying everywhere, they'll resurrect, their invulnerability will run out, and they'll get knocked down again. And basically their parents going to be explaining the entire time, no, you have to keep pressing A to get back up. And that's not a super fun experience either. Like, that's not a kids friendly, eventually they'll grind through the level, or they'll get up and wander off. But so to me, it feels like I guess I'm sympathetic to the idea of trying to solve this thing. But to me, it's a bigger solution than just disabling the battery. It's something like maybe the reverse fire is part of it, so you don't have to worry about them shooting. Maybe there's other things you could add. I don't know. I thought reverse fire was a really nice way of addressing the auto fire requests, because to me reverse fire is an implementation of an auto fire mechanism, and I thought that was something that kind of fits really well with what Cactus is and the way that the secondaries work and stuff, and so that you still have that you don't lose the level of control that you have when you with the normal firing mechanism, but it still gives I guess people who want an auto fire something that they can mess around with.
Yeah, so thank you for that. I appreciate it. But going back to the battery for just a moment, I think one of the things that might help is finding a way to convey to players that there's no randomness in this, you know? I mean, because that's the one, I know that for me, that was the turning point, was because for a time I thought the batteries just kind of spawn after a certain time or a certain number of enemies killed, that kind of thing. And that, you know, the way the enemies spawned was random, so how am I going to know how to get a battery out there? But then once I realized that it was directly related to how I was engaging those enemies, that changed the entire game from there, because then I knew that it was within my control to spawn a battery.
Is that aha moment taken away from you if it's explained, though? Because, like, isn't that's like this
you know,
awareness threshold
I get what
that's
you're
really
saying.
rewarding to pass?
I get what you're saying, but one of the key problems, and it's a common complaint, that people won't get past that first hour or so of playtime because to them the battery mechanic is that frustrating. So I get what you're saying. It does take away that aha moment, but there are a lot of people that will never get to that aha moment, and those people that might play longer than that aren't going to recommend that to their friends. In fact, they're going to go and bitch about the battery mechanic.
Yeah,
I would go ahead, Tim.
I was just going to say, I'd happily give up that. Like, I don't think that's a particularly strong aha moment. It's maybe a nice moment, but I'd happily explain to people that, in fact, ideally, this is where it comes back to that trust thing. Ideally, what I'd like to say is, look, we've thought very carefully about the mechanics in this game. You probably won't find anything that's totally batshit. Please trust us. If you run into something that seems really weird, have a think about it, and maybe it won't end up being weird. But you can't say that. Like, if you put that as a disclaimer on the front of your game, people will go like,
right.
Good job, game designer, yeah.
Well, of course you're going to say that, right? Like, who's going to come out and go, I'm sorry, my game is actually crap.
Yeah, that is definitely a tricky spot for you guys. Especially since so many of the large companies are all just things that get cut and things that are, that just never get finalized in some of the games, and you hit that in a lot of the larger games, and it's just like, oh yeah, that's one of those areas.
It's odd though, like, because as we were saying earlier, the game does so much to make sure that a battery will spawn when you need it, and to make sure that things aren't as dire as they might feel. It's like, whether it's random or not shouldn't be an issue. It's whether or not the experience is solid, and it is.
The randomness is, I mean, I understand that, and that's why I often make a big point of saying there's no random. And the one that gets me is when people play the game for a bit and they come onto the forum and say, yes, I'm playing it. I'm a little bit worried that the random power-ups on bosses mean that, the high score run is compromised. And it was like, yep, that's been thought of.
Yeah, I love the way Nart says, and I don't know, maybe you say it as well, but he says, we don't use random number generators, we use a butterfly effect. It's a nice little quote.
But yeah, it's and it's funny because you say there's no random in Cactus. There's all kinds of little things that are basically undeterminable because of the way the physics system interacts and stuff like that. But what I mean is that obviously none of the base system, when you get a battery, what power up you get, when your power, all of these decisions, what the enemies do, and never random. They're all deterministic. They're all based on your position. They're all based on timing. They're all based on something that makes them predictable, but not because it's too chaotic. But and we do that. That's partly out of this trust thing as well. Because if we just had some systems which were literally random, then you would assume that other systems could be as well, and the whole thing would kind of crumble. But it's difficult to tell you that up front because, again, what does that mean? There's no random in this game. What? What's that? Why do I care? And take out the stupid battery mechanic, that kind of thing. And the battery's super interesting that way because if people think that they lost the level because I just arbitrarily said that they ran out of power, that sucks. No one likes that feeling of they dodged all the enemies, they dodged all the bullets, and then they still fell down. Even though, like, no one would play Daytona and say, I dodged all the cars, I never crashed into a fence, yet the game stopped me because I didn't make a checkpoint. Because we understand checkpoint racing in games,
Well, it's funny.
guess
I
maybe
always
some people
explain
did. I don't know.
I always explain the battery mechanic as a checkpoint system, like what you would have in an arcade racing game, where if you get the battery, then the timer is extended and you get to keep playing. Like that to me was that was how I came across the realization of what the battery was, and I was like, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah, and I like I like checkpoint systems more than a timer. And like Ninja Pizza Girl uses their timer in the level to force a similar type of tension dynamic. But I actually like checkpoints a little bit better because checkpoints can basically tell you how you're doing. If you're struggling to get a battery and the battery meter's flashing, the game's telling you that you need to play harder, you need to go faster, and you need to play more aggressively. It's my mercy, basically.
Yeah, every time I come across that on the forums too, it's always the people complaining about that kind of stuff with, well, I always come across it with the people who do complain, but it's always the same kind of response with that, is that, it's not RNG, and you could change your play style and fix those problems.
I've wanted to make a thread for a while now, which is titled something like "Any Sufficiently Advanced Procedural System is Indistinguishable from Magic," and try and get some discussion about why random would be bad and why procedural stuff is the right fit for Cactus, and kind of talk about the differences in the kinds of experiences that you can get in the hopes of kind of highlighting what Cactus is doing and why that's special. But mostly because I want to make that point about
it's kind of weird though. I don't think it. I think that's interesting for people that like the kind of the maths and the game design behind it, but it's absolutely no comfort for anyone who just lost a level because they ran out of battery. They kind of there's that weird feeling where they're angry about it, and they want to say this game is broken because it didn't let them through. And I get that feeling, but it's like, you also need to refocus that. You need to tell them, no. It's in your power, right? Everything's in your power. I mean, this is kind of the funny thing. In real life, a lot of things are not in our power. They're outside of our control. But the nice thing about video games, or at least what we hope, is that when you're playing a video game, you can succeed or fail based on your own merits. And it's like, Cactus is 100% about that, but maybe they're misinterpreting that, and they're thinking that this is another kind of thing where they just got screwed over by something.
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it. Like I said, I think it's... And again, there's no good way to say, hey, there's nothing random. Like you said, to someone who's just coming to play it, that's not going to mean much to them. But some way of kind of it reinforcing the idea that, like Sylaris said, change your play style. And then you can get that battery to appear.
That's very
I'm not
frowned
sure
upon,
exactly how you go about it, but... that's a difficult
and it's
one
considered
all
to be
around.
patronizing and whatever. It's like, I, as a player or as a customer who's always right, I should be free to play however I want. And it's like, well, that's not every game.
I'm gonna defer you to Rami Ismail again with the customer thing. I'll find that talk for you, Cheese. I think you'll really enjoy it.
Yeah.
That seems to be a reoccurring problem with society in general these days.
Well, we did have somebody saying that if enough people complain about something, then it gets done in the forums. And well,
that guy was
well, like they said in the real world, that's what happens. And all I could think is, like, the only real worlds I've ever witnessed that happen in is retail and bad parenting, and neither of those are really the real world, are they?
Yeah, the whole that's I have a whole nother thing on that side of stuff as well. I think it ultimately benefits Walmart, and it's part of their anti-competitive strategy against small operators. But anyway.
Well, definitely, I've seen some people who work in like the kind of the returns section of like some of the larger chain things, and they're saying they've seen things where like a fridge or something like that, for example, that comes back and it's like fallen downstairs and you can clearly see the dents and everything, and they're like, oh yeah, it doesn't work, and they have to basically take it back. Like, they're not allowed to just say no, and it's like, yeah, that's a good image you're giving the customers.
I know when I worked in retail that there was a very clear culture of the person who is the biggest ass gets the best treatment, and to me as like somebody who was doing customer service, I'm like, no, you want to reward the good customers and you want to provide them with the best experiences because they're the people who are gonna tell their friends and bring more good customers as opposed to these people who end up costing us money. But it's very difficult to convey that to management.
Yeah, that seems to be very unpopular. The idea is that it's not so much that you're rewarding the ones with bad behavior, it's that you're just don't want
dissent.
to hear them. And so the idea is, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and that somehow you will invest time, literal time and money into chasing these customers because I'm not sure why exactly. Like there's the
which just seems so wasteful.
Yeah, I mean, no one wants to have that place where someone has a problem, you go tell them, get lost. No one else has a problem, so
No.
Yeah, it's interesting. On an interesting note of that, I'm actually going to have to leave. I think it's getting on a bit. I've got to head into the city.
No worries. Well, totally appreciate you dropping in. It's been a lot of fun. If you don't mind, I wouldn't mind chucking an archive of this up somewhere for anybody who might be interested in hearing the stuff that you talked about.
Oh, I don't think I said anything too inflammatory, did I?
Definitely not.
We kept the bitching about people who don't like the batching mechanic to a minimum, I think.
It's all very constructive. We can fix this. We can make it better. It's all right.
Well, I guess the real thing is it's totally fair to not enjoy something, and it's totally fair to not like a game. Find a game that you can connect with and something that does suit your playstyles and stuff. I guess that's what my gut says when people say that they don't like what Cactus is and they want to change it to be something else. But it's very difficult to say that in a way that people are receptive to.
And I totally agree with that. You will have to be predisposed to liking intense games. If you don't like intense games that require a lot of attention, then Cactus just won't scratch that itch, and that's cool. Yeah. And it'd be better to figure that out earlier rather than later, and maybe they'll like what I make next. I don't know, but the ones that I think get me, and I made the joke about it before, was when they misunderstand the game, because then there's that feeling that maybe this is a game that they'd like, but they're just they've got an artificial barrier between them and the game that I didn't even put there, and it makes me feel like when they say, "Oh, the game's good, but the characters need to be balanced so they're fair," and you're like, "Well, no, they are." So you're missing something. Like there's a connection there that you're not making, or the battery mechanic ruins the game. It's like, well, it's not. So I don't know. Yeah.
It's like the you talked about trust and stuff, but the inverse of that is what experiences are people having that lead them to believe that people who make games are not thinking about what they're doing? What are people doing that leads them to assume that everything is random? What are people doing that lead them to assume that game developers are making poor design decisions and being thoughtless in the decisions they make?
That's an easy one. There's a lot of game designers making poor decisions and being thoughtless.
I guess. Are there?
That's a lot of the large game studios and the AAA titles.
Well, that's it. I don't play much in the large AAA titles.
Large, small, The thing is, game developers run the full gamut. There are games that are basically rubbish. There are games that look good at the start and actually fall apart. There are games that look really ropey at the start and actually become really solid, and you realize that they're actually got a far better core than you ever thought. There are games that are just average, that just dole along doing what everyone else does, but they look really nice, so they kind of get by. That's a lot of the big AAA games. That's the safe path that they take these days. But and that's why the trust thing is really difficult, because you can't ask for it because it changes so much.
Even with that though, there are people who enjoy things that I look at and go, "Wow, this is crap," and it's there's so much diversity out there that things that are poorly designed or things that are not very well made have the ability to be enriching and engaging for somebody out there, it's odd to me that that there isn't a desire to chase things that align with your tastes that instead there's a desire for everybody to try and exert pressure to make something that exists align with their tastes.
Yeah, that's the one I find kind of weird actually. When sometimes people come into the Steam forum and will say, "I think you should change this, and this," and you look at it and you go, "That's a nice game you designed there. It's not my game, but
hope you get to make it someday." With this. Yeah. No, it's totally true. It's true. I know. I kind of wish that people felt empowered to try and explore things on their own and understand things. It's kind of sad that, particularly like the battery mechanic, like you were saying, that someone comes in and they go, right, it's totally inappropriate for you to not consider putting in a no battery option. And it's like, well, you did consider it, and you did think about it, and you kind of came to the decision as a game designer that it wasn't the right path to pursue. But again, the assumption is that you haven't thought about it, and it's an oversight, and a gross one at that, and it's odd.
Yeah, or that any reluctance to do it now is stubbornness and
or
some
laziness
sort of
and stubbornness. Yeah,
laziness. Oh god, lazy devs. I want a T-shirt.
Why do you hate your players?
Lazy, greedy devs. Yeah, that's one of my favorites.
Why do you hate your customers so much? That's like...
Yeah. Well, the ones that go, I don't understand why you don't add multiplayer to the game. You'd make so much more money.
Yeah, it's press that multiplayer button. Make it happen.
Thanks, wandering business advisor. That's great.
Yeah, from a programming standpoint, all those people that ask for that, it's like, yes, you clearly have no idea what's involved in that.
Yeah, or the potential economic impact. Like, maybe it would help sales, maybe it wouldn't. Maybe it would fracture the game into, like, it probably wouldn't be a great online multiplayer game to play just as a community experience type thing, as it is now. Well, it'd have to become something else.
We already see people who approach it as a co-op game first, and as we said earlier, it can be easy for first-time co-op players to not quite get what's going on. And if it's a single-player, if it's designed primarily as a single-player game, and people aren't appreciating that that's its first and foremost focus, then the opportunities for them to have negative experiences are higher. And so again, if it's an online multiplayer game, people assume that that's its primary focus and have a lesser experience because of that. Which is probably what you're in the middle of just saying, so sorry.
No. And on that note, I really should go, because I...
right, yes, sorry.
I'm going to be late. But
thank you again.
Yeah, okay, cool. Alright, see you guys.
Keep making awesome stuff.
See ya.
Well, that was fun.